To record. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to read part, if not all, the last section of paragraph 31. It's on page 487. Thank you to Moshe for finding it. Page 487. Um, and let me explain what's going on here. And with this tonight, I hope to finish essay number 4. Whether we finish it or not, I'm considering it finished tonight and starting next week fresh with essay number 5. What's been happening is this section is an unbelievable amount of deep insight Chachamim had 2,000 years ago plus, at least, into all kinds of matters, both in the animal kingdom and the human body, of anatomy and things that they knew, not just intuitively, but intellectually, the smarts that they had. And we're going to talk at this point, let's say page 487, where it says, Umehamufla shebedinehem betrefot, with the wondrous or amazing things about their rules when it comes to trefot. We're going to start reading. I'm going to start to read that now. Like I say, it's a pretty long section. I'm going to go through. I'm not going to necessarily translate every single thing, but a lot of it. And then when we finish this paragraph, the Rav Aviner has a nice kind of a summary here of the books that we're doing. If we get to it tonight, fine. If not, I can use that next week also. Okay, here we go. And like I said, we're going to finish at 7:30. So people want to go to Mariv, and then it'll be Yom HaZikaron along with the siren at 8 o'clock, of course. That's why we're only having a shortened lesson tonight. Okay. When we do, oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm going back to, where did I say? Umehamufla, right. Umehamufla shebedinehem betrefot, shedikteku ba'agbalat hagova. So there was something amazing that the Chachamim determined, having to do with when an animal that, we talk about an animal that's treif, doesn't mean it's a non-kosher animal. It could be an animal that was kosher, such as a cow, but something happened to it. It broke its leg, it fell, a whole bunch of other things. It then is treifa, which means it cannot be used for kosher. And one of the situations is when an animal falls. And what happens in that case? That, for example, if an animal was at a height and it was pushed down, then because of the broken bones, the animal is not considered kosher, which means it's a kosher animal, but it can't be used for kosher any longer because it falls into the category of a treifa. Skip the next sentence and go to where it says, and then they said, what happens if a person left an animal, let's say on a rooftop or on a height on a hill, and they left and they come back and they find the animal lying down or on the bottom? It seems to have fallen. We don't worry about the fact that maybe the animal's bones potentially were broken. Why? We just said if the animal starts at a height and you push it over a cliff, for example, not a cliff, but a height, and it falls off of a building or whatever it might be, that we do say that it can be a treifa. Now you're saying if you started off at the top and you didn't see what happened and now it's on the bottom, that it's not a treifa. Why? Mishum da'amda anafshe. What does that mean? It measures itself, or it knows itself. Vitzono lamar ki habehema misha'eret la'atzma mechavenet lidlog v'lo yazikena kasher yazikim dochim ota. An animal has an instinct that if it jumps from a height or falls from a height, not pushed, its instinct as to how it's going to land, it lands properly and won't. I mean, obviously, if you see broken bones, it's a different story. But if it seems to be fine, then you're okay. As opposed to when it is pushed and it's not expecting it, it doesn't know to brace itself in the proper way. No differently than if you feel yourself falling, what your initial reaction is, how do you fall and protect yourself? Or how if someone, God forbid, pushes you down, what could be the difference? So he's telling us that there's a definite physiological way of a response of an animal when it is pushed versus when it falls. Other areas, he's going to give us a laundry list of other anatomical issues where they knew what they were talking about already thousands of years ago. Charuta bidei shamayim kshera. If the animal, we're talking now in this case a cow, has what's called a dry lung, kshera, it's kosher as long as it was born that way or nothing was done to it to make it dry. Bidei adam, but if something a person did to cause to have a dry lung, treifa, it's not considered okay to eat. It's not kosher. Mishum tzimuk re'ah, because of the way that the lung is contracted. And how do you know? How do you know which way it's caused, what caused it to be dry? Uvedikuta, and it's bedika, when you check it, shriyata b'mayim poshrim me'et le'et. You leave it in warm water for 24 hours. Ihadra bria kshera. If it comes back, it is healthy and it is considered kosher. V'imlav treifa. And if not, it's considered treifa. Umashamur reya kuchla kshera. If you have a blue, don't worry, we'll get past these little things, these parts, and we'll go into humans in a minute. If you saw a bluish lung, kadiota treifa. If it's ink black, it's treifa. My tama, why? Hai shachor adomu ela shalakat. Yiruka kshira. Because a black lung in an animal, in a cow, is really red, but it is damaged, and therefore, by the way, the same thing is true in Hilchot Nida, and therefore it's considered also not kosher. Yiruka, but if the lung was greenish tinted, it's kosher. They also said that an animal whose lung is partially red, now it's naturally red, but it to be reddish, like an unusual red, partially it's kosher. But if it's completely red, it's treifa. Now, before we go on to about Rabbi Natan HaBavli, just understand what they're trying to tell us is that there are certain physical characteristics of an animal that they knew that with a certain kind of a disease, a certain kind of a blemish, a certain type of a deformity, that animal, what does it mean it's treifa? It means that it would not survive a year of another year of living. It would die. So they knew in their chokhmah already that the anatomy of the animal, in one way, would survive the year, and another way, it would not survive the year. Now we're going to talk a little bit about humans. Rabbi Natan HaBavli, sheviu lefanav yelud shu yarok. A woman, I assume a woman, brought a child, a newborn baby, to Rabbi Natan HaBavli, and the baby was jaundiced. Amar lahem, hamtinu lo ad sheyipol bo damo. Wait, don't give the child a brit until his blood has the chance to properly be absorbed into the body. Ritzono lamar means shelo yamulo to ad sheyitpashet damo b'bsaro. I already kind of jumped the gun and explained that don't give him a brit milah until his blood has had a chance to properly go through the body. Now, nowadays, I give you, like, just a few weeks ago, I went to the brit of a great nephew of mine who was the first child named for my father, Allah Shalom, and they had to delay the brit for 10 days, whatever it was, because of a bilirubin issue. The child was jaundiced. Okay, you go back, if you look at if you go online and take a look at when was jaundice first seen as being an issue and all, I don't know, I didn't do it, but I'm going to guess the Middle Ages, whatever it might be. Maybe it was even later. But we're talking about the time already, the Rabbi Natan HaBavli, in the time of the Talmud, already knew this. V'asu came, they did this, they waited. This is the first child that survived of a woman whose other children that had been born had a brit milah, and they died. By the way, it's a kind of, I have to look at the Gemara, but it's an unusual statement because halacha is in general that if a woman has two boys, and they both died, God forbid, after a brit milah, you don't give a brit to the third child because it appears that there's a genetic issue. However, in this case, for whatever reason, this is what the statement was, and because the other children died, and he said, let's wait. So what did happen? Furthermore, another situation. They had brought a child to Rabbi Natan HaBavli who was ruddy, he was reddish. And he said to them, to the parents, same thing, wait till the body properly absorbs the blood, and wait. And then they did that, and the child lived. They called the baby Natan HaBavli based on the name of the man who basically saved this child's life. I'll tell you a funny story. I have a friend in Chicago who, it's kind of strange, but he has a double job. Strange because what they are. One is he's a paramedic, and the other he's also a funeral director. So you can imagine. I can tell you, not just as a joke, but literally, I know a guy who fainted in shul one time, and this man, Simcha is his name. Simcha ran over to help him, and when the man came to, he's looking at Simcha. He says, "Tell me, am I dead or am I going to a hospital?" So but anyway, so Simcha was years ago before he lived in Chicago, he lived in New York, and he was driving on some highway, and he saw a family, a man and a woman, or man waving down, trying to flag down a car. And so he pulled over. He's a paramedic. He was a paramedic. It was New Jersey or New York, and he pulled over because it was obviously a distress issue. And the woman, it was a couple from Puerto Rico, I believe, and she was in labor on the side of the road. So he delivered the baby, and they wanted to name the baby after him. So they said, "Okay, what's your name?" He said, "My name is Simcha." They said, "No. We're not going to do that. We're not naming him no Simcha because whatever they named him, I don't know." But in any case, in this particular situation, they named the child after Natan Bavli because he saved their lives, both these children. And they also said, Chelev tahor sotem, tameh eno sotem. Non-kosher chelev. There's different, now we're back to animals now. There are different parts of the body of the animals, you may know, cow, let's talk about, that are not kosher. For example, the hind quarter of an animal has what's called chelev, which you know from Parshiot in Sefer Vayikra, that certain chelev is not kosher and certain is. So the best example is what's called the Gid HaNasheh. The Gid HaNasheh is surrounded by chelev, and by removing the Gid HaNasheh and doing what's called trebering in Yiddish, where they remove, which is done here in Israel. It's very rare to find in the United States. This is where you get, what's it called? Filet mignon. Right, filet mignon. I've actually had it here once. Pretty good.
Novi and Tiberia.
What, really?
Yeah.
Dex.
Trebering,
right. Huh?
Trebering in English is purging.
Purging, yes.
Purging, and it's only used for that.
Such a nice word.
An English word. Sorry, not purging. Porging.
Porging. P-O-R-G-I-N-G.
P-O-R-G-E. Right. And it's an English word that's only used for what we need to do.
Great.
Incredible.
In any case, they make a distinction. We say fat is fat, but it's not true. They say that chelev tahor, chelev that is kosher inside the animal, sotem. If there were a hole in the body inside, it would naturally plug it up. Tameh eno sotem. But the chelev that is not kosher, the animal, would not do the same thing. You think the animal has fat, right? So it's going to do, it either works one way or the other. But he says no. The Chachamim already knew that they acted or reacted to a body deficiency differently. Midakuti nehem, and the precision of their knowledge of law, of Torah. So you know that an animal, this is literally was Pashat Shavua last week, that an animal that chews its cud and has split hooves is a kosher animal. Classic example, cow. An animal, a cow that chews its cud is because it has numerous stomachs, one of which is known as the Beit HaKosot, which it actually looks like a bunch of cups. I think some of you know that I learned shechita, physically learned the shecht, and b'dika, and how to check the animal, and opening the lungs, and all these other things, which I found absolutely fascinating. But it says as follows, that if they find a needle inside the lining of the stomach of the Beit HaKosot, if you see a drop of blood on that needle, you can know that the animal swallowed it before it was shechted. If it was in there but there was no blood on it, you can know that somehow that needle found its way into that area after shechita. So who cares? What does that mean? It's a business thing. It doesn't make any sense that there would be blood on a needle after the shechita, because the blood doesn't flow in the animal when it's dead. And therefore, the one he bought it from cannot say, "Hey, you sold me a treif animal." But if you do find this drop of blood, he can say, you sold me a treifa animal, not non-kosher, but one that has been determined halachically that would not live a year, and therefore is not an okay animal to eat. Okay, wait, stop there. Even if this is not 100% clear to you, understand what it's trying to show us. Remember, let's not lose sight of what's going on here. The king is asked scientifically, tell me what your rabbis knew. Tell me their genius. And what he basically is doing is giving us this information. It's got more to go now. Actually, I want to skip this section here. I'll tell you where I want to go to. Actually, I'm just going to give you like an overview of the next few lines, next couple paragraphs, instead of reading every single word. The Chaver, the Rav, is going to talk about various things. Oh, I do want to come back to just one idea of treifa. You might think for like, okay, so they find a needle inside. It has a drop of blood. Chachamim say, and it's brought in the Shulchan Aruch, actually, in the section of Yerodea. The very beginning of the section of Yerodea, it talks about Hilchot Shchita and then Treifot, and what makes the animal kosher, makes it not kosher. Okay, fine. So it's not kosher. Big deal. Well, nowadays, it's not that it's not a big deal, but there are tens of thousands of animals that are shechted all the time. So the one is not kosher. They find a problem with it. So it goes to the church. If they don't lose money, they lose some money. The non-kosher slaughterhouse then pays the kosher slaughterhouse for the value of the animal. But now, keep in mind, like there may have been the cow. Think of Anatevka. They had the cow, and then they go to shecht it, and then they're going to cut it up. And this may be all the meat they might be able to see for the next 3 months. So it's a big deal. In the olden days, the time, let's say it's not so olden days, my grandmother, let's say, for example, tonight, Dafka happens to be her yard site. My mother's mother, my maternal grandmother's yard site's tonight. She may have bought a raw chicken or a chicken that was, she shouldn't get a shechted chicken. And then she sees a problem with it. She might have taken the chicken to the Rav to ask, is it kosher or not? He sees that there's a problem with the kidneys, or might have a problem with the lungs, whatever it might have been. Nowadays, it's almost not done, at least not in the first world countries. But how does the Rav know? Was it because I learned them that makes me an anatomical genius? Not at all. It means I learned it in the Shulchan Aruch. How did Rav Yosef Karo decide when he wrote the Shulchan Aruch in the 1500s, late 1400s, early 1500s? How did he decide that this animal was going to be kosher, this defect was not? So it was based on the poskim that came before him, and before that was in the Talmud, and it discusses it in Masechet Chulin. And that's what this next half a page to a page is dealing with, all these different things, whether it was the kidneys, or it was something to do with an animal that was pregnant, and was it the shilia, the placenta, was it this, all kinds of things. How did they know thousands of years ago all these different things, that with this particular defect, the animal wasn't going to live a year, therefore treifa. With this other particular defect, it's not treifa, and it can live for the year, and it's okay. Because this is exactly the point that the Rav is trying to make here in this end of the essay, was, we've talked about all kinds of esoteric things, a lot of esoteric stuff in the fourth essay. And he ends with something that's very gashmi, very physical. But the fact that the Chachamim knew thousands of years ago these details, extreme detail, it doesn't take I wouldn't say it doesn't take a rocket scientist, but they would have rocket scientists back then. It didn't take a rocket scientist to take an animal apart and to study it and to know what it looks like, and it has 4 stomachs. Okay, that's fine. But to know not just the anatomy, but to know the details of the different diseases in the animal and how it affected the animal, and also the differences between the falling and how it's pushed. That is what his point is trying to make here. What I want to do, I want to share with you one slide. What time is it? Okay, we've got 5 minutes. I want to share with you, oops, it helps if I do a screenshot, doesn't it? One slide with which we will conclude this section. He's talking right before this. Rav Aviner was talking about a few things having to do with number 5, and he's going to continue. We're picking it up in the middle. You'll see it. Yeah, it's on screen share. Correct. You'll see it says V'chein chamisha chalakim. Yes. Okay. V'chein chamisha chalakim Sefer Kuzari. So too, there are 5 sections to Sefer Kuzari. Remember, we just finished now the 4th one. Inyanam, their topic, are as follows: Hashoresh, the root. Hold on one second. I want to get it on my book. I like looking. It's easier for me to look in my book than it is to look on the screen. Oops, sorry about that. Okay. Hashoresh, the root. Ha'etzem, the essence. And we're going to see what this all means. Hapirut, the detail. Hahofa'ah, the appearance. Hahitgashmut, realization. What does this mean? We'll explain in a minute. V'chein chamisha chumshei Torah. So too, there are 5 books of the Torah. Chumash Bereshit, Od lo mudubar al Am Yisrael, ela al Shoresh. The Torah in Chumash Bereshit is not really about Am Yisrael. Remember that really the first time they're called an Am is by Paro in Parashat Shemot, but it's talking about the Shoresh, the root, the Avot HaUmah, our forefathers and our mothers. Chumash Shemot, Etzem. It is the essence. Hofa'at Am Yisrael, the beginning of the presentation of Am Yisrael. Holadat ha'umah, Yetzirat ha'umah, the birth of the nation, the fashioning of the nation. Chumash Vayikra, Hitpartut, the detailing. Miu Am Yisrael, who is Am Yisrael, Hitnahaguto, how they're supposed to act, Seder HaMitzvot, Beit HaMikdash, v'chulei. Chumash Bamidbar, part 4. Hofa'at ha'umah Yisraelit is the coming out of, or the presentation of the nation of Israel. Haderech lehofa'atenu, the way of our presentation. Ketzad anu mefalsim darkenu be'ovi hametziut. Chumash Devarim, and finally the 5th book, Hofa'at Malchut Yisrael, the emergence or the appearance of the realization. We'll see in a second the appearance of Malchut Yisrael. Hitgashmut ha'umah be'eretz Yisrael, and the realization of the dream of the Jewish people of being in the land of Israel. Now, he's going to show how there's a correlation between those 5 books of the Torah and those steps to the 5 essays of the Kuzari. 2nd paragraph. V'chein mamash sefer Kuzari, and absolutely is the same thing when it comes to the Kuzari. Mamar Rishon, for those who've been around with me for about, 3 years now, 4 years. You may remember the first Ma'amar, the first essay, Shoresh Ha'inyan, really discussed the root of the matter. Mahi Emunah, Mahu Am Yisrael. What is Emunah? What is Am Yisrael? Hakdama Klalit, a general introduction. Zeo Basis Lakol. This was served as a foundation or basis for everything. Hakesher ben habilti muvan levein ma sheyesh bo efsharut hasbara kol she'i lamoach enoshi. A connection between that which is absolutely unfathomable that our human minds cannot conceive of and understand, and on the other hand, there's things that we might be able to have a little understanding. That's Ma'amar Rishon. Ma'amar Sheni, the 2nd essay, Etzem, essence. Hayadut v'hatochen hayaduti, Judaism and the contents of Judaism. Havanat inyane ha'emunah bichlalo, just a general idea of understanding of emunah. Ma'amar Shlishi, hitpartut, or detail. Hatochen hayahuduti me'ever leklalim, the depth, or not the depth, the content of Judaism above and beyond just rules. Kedugmat birur inyano shel hachasid, for example, explanation of what does it mean to be pious. Lo rak b'ofen klali, not just a general idea, ela b'ofen ishi prati, hanhagot hachasid. We talked about that at length, about the way a pious person comports himself. Mamar revi'i der seder hofa'at ha'inyanim. Now, as we've seen, we come to a conclusion, the way of the presentation, or the appearance rather, of various things. Umikan ovrim lama'amar chamishi. From there, we go into the 5th essay, hitgashmut ha'idiyal, realization of the ideal ha'elyon she'anu medabrim bo, that we're speaking of. The kamuvan pashut shesiumo yihye be'aliyah le'eretz Yisrael. If you don't know, it's a spoiler alert, the entire book ends with the fact that we belong in Israel. Okay, so at least we've got the end of the book down pat. Okay, here's the deal. We're going to stop. I will leave you with one thought, and before we stop, actually, that as we saw last week, and I mentioned also that when it comes to a kosher animal, it had to have 2 simanim, chew its cud and have split hooves. Simple question: Why two? God could do anything. He could just say any animal with split hooves, kosher. Any animal without split hooves, not kosher. Or chews its cud, kosher, doesn't chew its cud, not. Why do we need two? So where are those two simanim? The chewing its cud is an internal siman. When you look at the animal, you don't know it's chewing its cud necessarily. You don't know it's going up and down, up and down, up and down. And the split hooves are on the outside. The siman's on the outside. And what do we say about that animal? It's kasher. It's a message to us that, in fact, to be a proper Jew, it can't just be on the outside. It can't just be on the inside, but it has to be toho kevaro. Both on the inside and the outside are simanim to be Jewish, to be religious, to be dati, to be shomer Torah and mitzvot. Has to be both internal and external. I should say that, of course, that all those who fell in battle, all those who died in terror attacks, and all those who have been affected by either of those, which is unfortunately the vast majority of people in Israel, myself included, there should be an ilui neshama for every single one. And for those who are left behind from terrible terror attacks or other situations, Hashem should send them all some form of nechama. We will reconvene Bezrat Hashem, beginning with the fifth essay, starting a new day, Tuesday night next week. Bezrat Hashem, and I'll send out reminders. And I wish you all a good evening.
Good evening. Shukra.
Baruch Tiyeh.